The Vatican, the heart of Catholicism and a magnificent symbol of spiritual power. But what if behind its walls lie hidden not only prayers and holy relics? What if this city is a labyrinth of secrets, scandals, and dark rituals that the Church has been hiding from the world for centuries? This episode is built on the iceberg principle, a format where well-known facts are on the surface, while dark and disturbing secrets lie in the depths. At the tip of the Vatican iceberg are well-known facts and historical events, a bit deeper, controversial episodes from the past, and at the very foundation, frightening myths and scandalous exposés that still cast a shadow over the Holy See. Welcome to the Holy City with a dark soul. Ready to see the Vatican as you've never seen it before? To dive into its depths where reality intertwines with myths and holiness with sin? Then let's begin. The tip of the iceberg. Vatican, the city-state. The Vatican is the smallest independent state in the world, both by population, about 800 people, and by area, which is only 44 hectares, roughly the size of a large shopping mall. This is an enclave state located in the heart of Rome. In 1929, thanks to the Lateran Agreements, it received its current name, derived from the Latin word for prophecy, and gained complete independence from Italy. Officially, the Vatican became a sovereign auxiliary territory of the Holy See, the residence of the supreme spiritual leadership of the Roman Catholic Church. Although all power belongs to the Pope, day-to-day governance is carried out in his name by the Secretary of State and the Roman Curia, the main administrative body. The Vatican is one of 3 countries in the world with an absolute theocratic monarchy alongside Brunei and Saudi Arabia. Citizenship in the Vatican is not inherited. It's impossible to obtain by birthright. However, there are no applicants either. The Vatican is the only state with 0 birth rate. Only servants of the Holy See can become citizens, and citizenship is revoked upon dismissal. The Vatican has its own bank, known as the Institute for Religious Works, a post office, a pharmacy operating since 1874, and the shortest railway less than a kilometer, which connects to Italian tracks. The country has no airport of its own. Instead, there's a helipad, the Vatican Heliport. The Vatican and the Pope himself are protected by the Swiss Guard, the smallest and oldest army in the world. It was created in 1506 and consists of about 100 guards easily recognizable by their red, yellow, blue uniforms in medieval style. The country can also boast a powerful solar power plant and an observatory that conducts cutting-edge research in astronomy and astrophysics. The state has its own news website and radio station that broadcasts in 47 languages. Additionally, the Vatican publishes a daily newspaper and an annual directory in Italian, as well as an official bulletin of the Holy See in Latin. And of course, there are amazing landmarks here. For example, St. Peter's Basilica, the second largest Christian church in the world, allegedly built over the tomb of the Apostle Peter, the first pope. The Vatican also has a museum complex founded in the early 16th century, with works by great masters including the Sistine Chapel, on which Michelangelo and Raphael worked. The Pope, absolute monarch. The Pope is a multifaceted figure. He not only heads the Catholic Church, but is also the ruler of the Vatican and head of the Holy See. Although he's often called the Roman Pontiff, his official title is much more solemn: Bishop of Rome, Vicar of Christ, successor of the Prince of the Apostles, Supreme Pontiff of the Universal Church, Primate of Italy, Archbishop and Metropolitan of the Roman Province, Sovereign of Vatican City State, Servant of the Servants of God. The origins of the papacy trace back to the Apostle Peter, one of Jesus' 12 disciples. According to Catholic teaching, it was to him that Christ handed the keys to the kingdom of heaven, making him the first head of the church. Since then, the institution of the papacy has existed continuously for 2 millennia. The Pope is elected for life at a conclave, a gathering of cardinals. Formally, any unmarried Catholic can become Pope, but in practice, this position is occupied exclusively by clergy. By tradition, upon taking the throne, the pontiff takes a new name. Although this isn't mandatory, the last pope to keep his real name was Marcellus II, elected in 1555. In addition to spiritual leadership of the Church, the Pope performs secular functions. He represents Catholicism on the international stage and makes statements on moral and political issues. In matters of faith, his power is absolute. The pontiff's decisions are final and indisputable. It was popes who proclaimed such dogmas as the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary and their own infallibility. The history of the papacy is full of political intrigue and conspiracies. Some pontiffs were overthrown, imprisoned, or even posthumously tried, but we'll tell you about that a bit later. The Conclave. When a pope dies or abdicates, the Catholic world plunges into strange anticipation, the time of sede vacante, a period of powerlessness when the throne of St. Peter remains empty. During these days begins one of the Church's most mysterious rituals, the conclave. Conclave, from Latin cumclave, under lock, is a gathering of cardinals to elect a new pope. The tradition originated in 1059 when Pope Nicholas II decreed that the right to vote in papal elections should belong only to cardinals. And since then, every such gathering has been shrouded in secrecy. For the duration of the conclave, cardinals give up mobile phones, internet, and all external contacts, and swear to maintain the secrecy of the papal elections. Since 1871, voting has taken place exclusively in the Sistine Chapel. Each of the 100 cardinals under 80 years old writes the name of their candidate on a special ballot with the inscription, "I elect as Supreme Pontiff," then approaches the altar, pronounces an oath of honest choice, and drops the ballot into a chalice. After voting, the ballots are counted. If their number doesn't match the number of electors, the vote is declared invalid. At least 2/3 of the votes are required to elect a pope. After each round, the ballots are burned in a furnace, from which smoke rises through the chimney of the Sistine Chapel. If the smoke is black, it means the elections continue. If white, the Catholic world rejoices for a new pope has been elected. For this, special substances are added to the ballots that make the smoke either black or white, an ancient tradition that's several centuries old. Voting takes place up to 4 times a day. If after 3 days the conclave doesn't reach a decision, a break is declared, a day of prayers and negotiations. If even after the 21st round no pope is elected, the cardinals vote only between the 2 candidates who received the most votes. After election, the new pope chooses a new name, a tradition that began in 533 with Pope Joan II, who refused his secular name Mercurius, considering it too pagan for the supreme priest. Then, the elected pontiff is led to the so-called Room of Tears, where he first dons papal vestments, which are prepared in advance in 3 main sizes. The room got its name in 1590. According to legend, Pope Gregory XIV shed tears after his election. Usually the pontiff is chosen in a few days. However, the longest papal elections in history lasted almost 3 years. After the death of Pope Clement IV, cardinals from warring factions reached a deadlock, causing the conclave to last from 1268 to 1271. Eventually, desperate townspeople locked the cardinals in the bishop's palace, reduced their rations to bread and water, and then removed the roof of the building. This prompted the cardinals to make a decision much faster. The middle of the iceberg. Exorcism in the Vatican. The Catholic Church not only recognizes the existence of evil spirits, but officially trains its priests to fight them. Since 2005, the Vatican has been running closed courses to prepare specialists in spiritual warfare. Every year, hundreds of priests from around the world gather here to study ancient rituals, psychological aspects of possession, and tactics for protection against dark forces. The practice of exorcism itself has hardly changed since ancient times. The Vatican still uses the Roman ritual of 1614, an official collection of prayers and rites that contains detailed instructions for casting out demons. With the development of medicine and psychiatry, the Church has become more cautious about issues of possession. Many cases that were previously attributed to demonic influence are now viewed as manifestations of mental illness. Nevertheless, the practice of exorcism lives on to this day. Moreover, in 1991, the International Association of Exorcists was created, officially recognized by Pope Francis in 2014. Today, it has about 400 members from more than 30 countries worldwide. One of the founders of the association, Roman exorcist Gabriele Amorte, claimed to have performed tens of thousands of evil spirit expulsion rituals. He asserted that 90% of the possessed were Satanists, or those who dabbled in the occult. But how to distinguish possession from illness? The priest admitted many of his patients really needed psychiatric help. However, there were clear signs of possession: unexplained headaches and spasms, sudden knowledge of foreign languages, and aversion to prayers in Latin. Exorcism is a fairly controversial and dangerous practice. In Mexico and Africa, children accused of witchcraft are tortured under its guise. And the mentally ill receive prayers instead of treatment, which worsens their condition. After cases of people dying during rituals, the Vatican tightened the rules. Since 1999, medical consultation has been mandatory before exorcism. However, this hasn't eradicated the problem. Children continue to die at the hands of priests to this day, and yet the mysterious ritual doesn't lose popularity. Films like The Exorcist maintain an aura of mystery around exorcism. And people, just as thousands of years ago, continue to seek mysticism, turning to cults, shamans, and psychics, and according to the Church, opening the door to evil spirits with their own hands. But do they really exist? Who knows? The pornocracy. Pornocracy is one of the darkest and most scandalous periods in papal history, when power over the Holy See fell into the hands of powerful women, known for their ambitions, cruelty, and debauchery. In the early 900s, church leaders were not yet elected at conclaves, but were appointed by influential aristocrats. The most powerful of them was Theophylact of Tusculum, Roman consul, commander-in-chief, and papal treasurer. However, despite his loud titles, real power belonged to his wife, the legendary Theodora the Elder. Theodora was a woman with a sharp mind and uncompromising character. Historians debate her origins. Some call her a courtesan, others, an aristocrat's daughter. But one thing is clear: this woman knew perfectly how to manipulate men, and her power was based on wealth, influence, and numerous love affairs. However, her daughter, Marozia, proved even more ambitious and fearless, and surpassed her mother in immorality and cruelty. Already at 15, Marozia became the mistress of Pope Sergius III, from whom she had a son who later became Pope Joan XI. This fact, if we believe the chronicles, turned the Lateran Palace into a real den of thieves where power passed from hand to hand through bloody conspiracies and secret murders. After the death of Sergius III, Marozia didn't lose her composure. She married the influential Margrave Guido of Tuscany, who later helped her eliminate her mother's former lover, Pope John X. On Marozia's orders, soldiers burst into the Lateran Palace, killed the guards, and arrested the pontiff. According to some sources, John X was strangled in prison. According to others, he died of hunger and cruel treatment. After this, Marozia practically single-handedly ruled Rome. She appointed popes, poisoned the undesirable, and eliminated competitors. Leo VI and Stephen VII were merely temporary figures needed so that her own son John XI could occupy the throne in the future. However, Marozia overestimated her power. Having made her son pope and trying to unite secular and spiritual power in her hands, Marozia decided to start a new life. She poisoned Guido and married his brother Hugo of Arles. Romans considered this marriage unnatural and knew even more terrible rumors spread about Marozia. Allegedly, she not only fornicated with numerous lovers, but also seduced her own sons, the younger Giovanni and the elder Alberic. But the union with Hugo became fatal for Marozia. After another conflict with Hugo, Alberic raised a rebellion, overthrew his mother, and imprisoned her in a dungeon where she died. It's believed that the era of pornocracy ended from this moment, although its influence on the papal throne continued for several more decades. Despite the Vatican's attempts to hide this shameful episode, the history of pornocracy remains one of the brightest examples of how even the holiest institutions can be captured by sinners thirsting for power. Influence on world politics. The Vatican is not just the spiritual center of Catholicism, but a real empire of shadow influence. For centuries, the Holy See has skillfully used its spiritual power to interfere in the affairs of monarchs, empires, and even modern superpowers. From the very beginning of its existence, the Catholic Church understood the power of political influence. Popes crowned kings, condemned heretics, and even declared wars. One of the brightest demonstrations of the papacy's political power was the Crusades. The first such campaign began in 1096, when Urban II called on Christians to war against Muslims for control of Jerusalem. The result was a bloody conflict that changed the geopolitical map of the Middle East and consolidated Vatican power in Europe. Papal bulls also determined the fates of entire peoples. For example, the bull Inter Caetera of 1493, issued by Alexander VI, divided the newly discovered lands between Spain and Portugal, laying the foundations for their colonial empires. Vatican influence didn't weaken in the 20th century either. Since the 1940s, the Catholic Missionary Network fought against national liberation movements in Africa and Asia. In the 1980s, the Vatican helped establish dialogue between the US and USSR. Catholic organizations Caritas Internationalis and Opus Dei not only distributed humanitarian aid, but also fought against leftist movements in Latin America. And in 1978, Cardinal Karol Wojtyla, a former actor from communist Poland, became Pope John Paul II. American intelligence services invested millions of dollars in supporting the Polish cardinal, seeing him as a weapon against the USSR. Their calculation paid off. The Pope's appointment became a spark for the Solidarity movement and the subsequent collapse of communism. But there were even darker deals and agreements in Vatican history. The donation of Constantine. Since ancient times, history has been not just a science, but a weapon in the struggle for power. Rulers and the church manipulated the past, creating fake documents to justify their rights. And the loudest example is the donation of Constantine, a forgery that for 600 years determined the fate of Europe. The document, allegedly written by Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, who ruled from 306 to 337, told an amazing story. Constantine, suffering from leprosy, refused the advice of pagan priests to kill infants for sacrifice in exchange for healing. Then the apostles Peter and Paul appeared to him in a dream and promised healing if he accepted baptism. And so it happened. After miraculous recovery, the emperor in gratitude gave Pope Sylvester the first power over the Western Roman Empire, moved the capital to Constantinople, and recognized papal supremacy over all Christians and church revenues. Most likely, the document was created in the 8th century at the court of the de facto ruler of the Franks, Pepin the Short. He made a deal with the Pope. The Pope recognized him as king and Pepin, in turn gave the Pope lands, the future papal states, and the donation of Constantine became the legal justification for this deal for the people. Only in 1440 did Italian humanist Lorenzo Valla publish a sensational study proving that the document was a forgery. Valla stated that there were no mentions of this document before the 9th century, and the charter itself was written in incorrect and barbaric Latin that didn't exist in the 4th century. The Catholic Church acknowledged the forgery only in the 18th century, but continued to insist that its essence was true, and finally abandoned the donation only in the 19th century. The donation of Constantine is not just a medieval fake. It's an example of how myths create reality. For 600 years, Europe lived by rules invented by an unknown forger, and when the truth came out, it was too late. The legend of Pope Joan. One of Christianity's most scandalous secrets is the legend of a female pope. The story is so incredible that even after 12 centuries, historians debate, was Pope Joan a real figure or another medieval fake? According to 13th century chronicles in 814, a girl named Joan was born into an English missionary's family. a child prodigy who read theological works forbidden to women in Latin, Greek, and Aramaic. At 12, she ran away from home disguised as a monk and set off for Rome. Under a male name, she was able to enter theological school, after which she quickly rose through the church hierarchy until finally taking the place of the Pope himself in 855. For 2.5 years, she ruled the church under the name John VIII until tragedy revealed the truth. During one of the processions, Joan unexpectedly gave birth to a child right on the streets of Rome. The enraged crowd stoned her to death, and the Vatican introduced a humiliating check. Newly elected popes, until the 16th century, had to prove their gender by sitting on a porphyry chair with a hole through which cardinals could make sure they were indeed dealing with a man. Despite Joan's bust in Siena Cathedral and numerous depictions of a woman in papal robes, there's not a single mention of a female pope in 9th century chronicles. Joan's story appeared only 400 years after her supposed reign, which raises doubts about her reality. Moreover, it's known that in 855, after the death of Leo, the fourth Benedict III was immediately elected. There was no place for a female pope between them. The Church officially denies the existence of Pope Joan, calling this story a myth and Protestant propaganda. But who knows? Perhaps this secret will be revealed someday too. The Pact with Fascists. In 1922, two men came to the forefront of Italy, whose strange alliance would determine the country's fate for decades to come. Benito Mussolini, a former socialist and author of anti-clerical articles, headed the government. And in the Vatican, the new pope became Pius XI, a man who dreamed of returning the Church's former influence. By the 1920s, the Vatican, having lost secular power during Italian unification, was in decline. The Church was removed from politics, and its property was confiscated. Mussolini understood perfectly. To control a nation where 97% of the population professed Catholicism, he needed the Church's support. After 7 years of difficult negotiations on February 11, 1929, a historic concordat was signed in the Lateran Palace. Its terms were beneficial to both sides. Among other things, the Vatican gained the status of a sovereign state. Catholicism was declared the state religion of Italy, and the Church received huge compensation for lost lands. In return, Mussolini received what was worth more than money: the Pope's blessing and legitimacy in the eyes of millions of believers. This strange alliance was cemented by hatred of common enemies. Both fascists and the Vatican saw threats in liberal democracy, communism, and feminism. In 1933, another concordat was signed in the Vatican, with Nazi Germany personally approved by Cardinal Pacelli, the future Pius XII. Essentially, it legitimized Hitler's regime in exchange for protecting Catholic privileges. In 1938, Mussolini, imitating Hitler, introduced racial laws against Jews. And the Vatican didn't react at all. Although Pius XI privately called anti-Semitism disgusting, no official condemnation followed. Fear of communism, deep anti-Semitic traditions, and diplomatic calculation. All this became the reason for the Vatican's criminal silence. Only in 1943, when the Nazis began deporting Roman Jews literally under the Vatican's windows, did the Church secretly help save refugees. Monasteries and churches in Rome became refuge for thousands of people, but no official condemnation of the Holocaust was ever heard. When the fascist regime fell, the Vatican became involved in a new scandal. Along the so-called rat lines, hundreds of Nazis, including Joseph Mengele and Adolf Eichmann, fled to Latin America. As it later turned out, some Catholic priests and even high-ranking Vatican officials helped them obtain false documents. Having blessed tyrants, the Vatican became an accomplice to their crimes, but never answered for them. The Cadaver Synod. January 897. In the Lateran Basilica of Rome, something unthinkable is happening. At a church trial stands the half-decomposed corpse of Pope Formosus, who died 7 months ago. He was dug up from his grave dressed in papal robes and seated on a throne for a posthumous trial. Thus began the darkest trial in church history, the infamous Cadaver Synod. Formosus, a former bishop and talented diplomat, had managed to make many enemies during his lifetime. After exile and excommunication from the church, he incredibly returned to Rome and even became pope in 891. But his political maneuvers made him a target for revenge. When Pope Stephen VI came to power, the exhumed corpse of Formosus was accused of illegally seizing the papal throne perjury and violating church canons. An appointed lawyer helplessly tried to defend the decomposing body, while the court unanimously found the dead pope guilty. Symbolic execution followed. Papal vestments were torn from the corpse, 3 fingers, with which he blessed believers were cut off, and then the body was thrown into the Tiber. This barbaric ceremony caused such outrage that Stephen VI was soon overthrown and strangled in prison. Subsequent popes tried to correct the situation. Formosus's remains were fished from the river and reburied with honors. But the stain on the church's reputation remained. The Abyss. Dirty secrets of Vatican elite. Despite its holy mission, the Vatican continues to hide other dirty secrets. At the center of the loudest scandals are accusations of covering up sexual crimes against children, which have become one of the darkest stains in Catholic Church history. In 2015, shocking facts emerged from the biography of the Vatican's chief financier, Australian Cardinal George Pell. He bribed victims to cover up sexual crimes and lived under the same roof as priest Gerald Ridsdale, convicted of 54 cases of violent acts against children. In 2018, a court found Pell guilty of several crimes against children, but already in 2020, the cardinal was freed. The court doubted the truthfulness of victims' testimonies. At the same time in the US, another high-ranking cardinal, Theodore McCarrick, was also caught in wrongful acts regarding boys whom he paid for silence. The Vatican defrocked him, but he never went to prison. But these are just the loudest cases. In 2017, the Australian Commission for the Investigation of Sexual Crimes Against Minors stated that over the past 35 years, 4,500 accusations had been filed against priests in the country. About 100 clergy were sent to prison. In 2018, a report was published in Pennsylvania about 300 priests involved in these crimes and thousands of their victims. Most avoided punishment. The statute of limitations had expired. And in France in 2021, they admitted, over 70 years, 216,000 children suffered at the hands of clergy. Pope Francis swore to eradicate the criminal inclinations of clergy, but was himself drawn into this dark whirlpool. Repenting for past sins, he continued to protect his appointee, Bishop Gustavo Sanchetti. Despite complaints from priests about Sanchetti's financial machinations and unhealthy interest in seminarians, Cardinal Bergoglio, the future pope, turned a blind eye to this. Upon becoming pontiff, he immediately made Sanchetti a bishop, but already in 2017, he resigned. He was caught storing adult materials and again accused of harassment. However, Francis continued to help his protege and even appointed an investigation against the victims who exposed Sanchetti. Perhaps it's about mutual cover-up or fear that Sanchetti knew too much about his own sins. The election of Leo XIV was supposed to mark a new beginning for the Vatican, but something went wrong. The new pope, former Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, immediately found himself at the center of scandal. It turned out he had been accused of covering up crimes against children even before beginning his pontificate. In the early 2000s, while heading the Augustinian order in Chicago, Prevost placed in a monastery next to a school priest James Ray, who had been removed from service due to wrongful acts regarding children. Despite parishioners' outrage, Ray lived there until 2002. Prevost didn't warn the school administration about Ray's dark past, and then assured that the priest was under supervision. But that's not all. From 2014 to 2023, Prevost headed the Diocese of Chiclayo in Peru, where 2 priests avoided punishment for violence for many years. Victims of abuse appealed to the future pope personally, but received only silence or false promises in response. Additionally, Prevost deliberately delayed church investigations. As a result, their statute of limitations expired and cases were closed. A group of surviving victims of priest abuse stated they warned cardinals about Prevost's past before the conclave. If the cardinals knew about Prevost's problems, it means it didn't concern them. and this says a lot about the system. Vatican's dark finances. The Institute for Religious Works, known as the Vatican Bank, was created by Pope Pius XII in 1942, allegedly to manage donations and finance church missions. But in reality, everything wasn't so simple. Already in 1945, Croatian dictator Ante Pavelic, hiding from justice along the already mentioned rat lines, transferred 10 trucks of gold looted from Serbs and Jews to the Vatican. The gold disappeared, and this was just the beginning. For decades, the Vatican Bank provided anonymous accounts, attracting not only clergy, but also politicians, businessmen, and even criminals. The Vatican accepted deposits without reporting, gold jewelry cash. The bank became a black box, and where money flowed from around the world remains a mystery. The Institute for Religious Works had close ties with Banco Ambrosiano, and one of the loudest cases in Vatican financial history is connected with it. Roberto Calvi, president of Ambrosiano, built complex financial schemes allowing millions of dollars to disappear without a trace in offshore accounts. And through networks of shell companies, the bank helped criminal syndicates launder money obtained from drug trafficking, racketeering, and murders. However, in the early 80s, auditors discovered that about $1.3 billion had disappeared without a trace from the bank's accounts. This money was transferred through offshore accounts in Latin America, but the trail led directly to the Vatican Bank. The bankruptcy of Banco Ambrosiano threatened the stability of the entire Italian banking system and caused a scandal at the highest level. Shortly before this, Calvi wrote a letter to Pope John Paul II threatening a grandiose catastrophe that would cause the heaviest damage to the church. Receiving no response in '82, Calvi was forced to flee to London, leaving his lawyer a briefcase with documents that allegedly contained evidence of Vatican connections with the mafia. Soon, Roberto Calvi's secretary allegedly jumped out of her office window herself, and a day later, Calvi's body was found hanging by his feet under Blackfriars Bridge with bundles of cash in his pockets. Presumably, members of the Masonic Lodge Propaganda No. 2 were involved in their deaths, but no culprits were found, and the case was quickly covered up. However, a year later, an even stranger story occurred. Emanuela Orlandi, daughter of a Vatican Bank employee, went to school and no one ever saw her again. Rumors circulated that her father tried to blackmail the bank with certain documents, once again proving the connection of Vatican leadership with the mafia. Emanuela's disappearance was investigated by both her family and police. But when the latter decided to question those close to Pope John Paul II, the Vatican refused, and the Orlandi case remains unsolved to this day. Despite numerous audits and reforms, the Vatican Bank still often finds itself at the epicenter of financial scandals. According to statistics, each Catholic donates an average of $10 per week to the church. 2 of them disappear without a trace in the Institute for Religious Works. And who knows what terrible things the Vatican is financing right now. Vatican Secret Archives. Behind Vatican walls lies one of the world's most mysterious and guarded archives, the Vatican Apostolic Archive, formerly known as the Vatican Secret Archive. The word secretum in Latin means personal or private, but centuries of rumors and legends have given it an ominous overtone. The archive now occupies more than 85 kilometers of shelves, storing millions of documents covering almost 2,000 years of history, from ancient papyri to modern diplomatic files. Here you can find personal correspondence of popes with kings and emperors, medieval codices and manuscripts, ancient Inquisition acts and trial protocols against heretics documents from the Crusades and Renaissance periods, and much more. Among the most famous artifacts are a letter from Queen Mary Stuart hours before her execution, in which she begged the Pope for help, documents about Galileo Galilei's trial, and a message to Henry VIII about his divorce from Catherine of Aragon. This event provoked the split of the Catholic Church in England. Despite the fact that in recent decades the Vatican has opened access to some historical documents, most of the archive remains secret and generates many conspiracy theories. Rumors suggest that the archive may contain documents that disprove Jesus' existence, prove the existence of aliens, and predict the apocalypse. And some are even convinced that the archive hides a time machine. To access the Vatican archive, you need to be a PhD candidate and provide recommendations from high-ranking church officials. You also need to have a clear research plan. Just looking around won't work. And you should be patient. Permission takes months to arrive. The Vatican is now digitizing the archive and declassifying new documents, for example, about Pius XII and his role in World War II. And in 2025, scholars discovered unknown fragments of scripture in the archive. They were hidden under 3 layers of later texts. This artifact was created in the 6th century and contains new information absent from the canonical version of the New Testament. Its study continues, but how many more unrevealed stories await their hour? Perhaps someday we'll learn them too. Lucifer's tomb. In December 2024, viral posts began appearing on social media. Allegedly, Pope Francis would open 5 sacred portals for Christmas for the first time in history, one of which leads to Lucifer's tomb. This sensation quickly spread across TikTok and Reddit, and grew with fantastic details. But what really lies behind this myth? The rumor was based on a real event, the celebration of the Jubilee of 2025. As part of the Jubilee, which has been celebrated every 25 years for about 7 centuries, the Pope indeed opens holy doors. These are symbolic doors in Rome's 4 main basilicas, which are solemnly opened for pilgrims, and passing through them symbolizes purification from sins and spiritual renewal. The only thing that really happened for the first time at the 2025 Jubilee was the opening of a 5th door located in Rome's Rebibbia prison. This act called on all prisoners to look to the future with hope and faith. But where did the myth of Lucifer's tomb come from? Obviously, it all started with misinterpretation of an intriguing headline in the New York Post about a ritual that had never been performed, and news about a real Lucifer's tomb in the Vatican necropolis. There's even a map where this tomb is marked. However, in ancient times, Lucifer was a common name among Christians and had no connection to Satan, or did it? So no, this time the Pope didn't open a portal to hell, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The Vatican is not just a spiritual center, but a symbol of contradictions, a machine of power shrouded in an aura of holiness, but often stained by scandals and dark secrets. Its history is not only myths and legends, but also blood gold and sins. Here faith collides with ambitions, and light mixes with darkness. Vatican secrets remind us how much remains hidden from human eyes. Perhaps that's why this city continues to attract truth seekers, provoking new theories and exposés. Which story changed your perception of the Vatican? Share your impressions in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss icebergs on even more shocking topics. See you in the next video.